Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to a special pre-event interview for Shared Services Europe Autumn. I'm here with Candice Sieg, who's the Global GBS Practice Lead for KPMG. KPMG, of course, being our lead partner for Shared Services Autumn in Amsterdam this October. Candice, thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much, Ben. It's great to be here. I look forward to the conversation.
So it'll become tough, okay? But we're going to start with a gentle question about the world today and how complicated it is. So safe to say that global business environment is not the easiest right now. There's plenty of uncertainty. As a leader, what do you think right now about what's going on in the world, and specifically what impact that's having and what implications it has for GBS Shared Services?
You said they're going to start easy, Ben.
Sort of lied, really.
So, look, I mean, yes, jokes aside, there is a huge amount of macroeconomic, political issues going on around the world, and changes, challenges, etc. Certainly from a GBS perspective, I think there are two big areas where it's impacting. And one is people are really reconsidering their location strategies. And where everything was about consolidation in certain areas before, it's actually now, do they look at certain country consolidations because of those pressures? No one wants what happened in Russia to happen in maybe another country. So we definitely are seeing a shift around, the location strategy and being, I guess, a little bit more decisive around where they go, depending on who they are serving, and depending on where they currently exist. Mm-hmm. And then, of course, tariffs. We've heard in the last 2 weeks that services now might be subject to tariffs. So that is definitely one that is on the minds of GBS leaders. And how do we react to that? Personally, I think there's a 3-year tenure coming up. Do you react, or do you wait it out? We'll see. But I think those are two areas where we're seeing GBS leaders certainly looking at the operations in a different manner.
So it's very easy to do an interview now and talk about the negative impact of everything that you've just mentioned, but we like to do things differently. So let's talk about the positive. What opportunity do you see for GBS given all of the uncertainty that you've just described? Why is it a good moment in time for them, maybe?
I guess it's a good moment in time because, certainly in regions and areas where things are uncertain, GBS can step in. We certainly saw this in Ukraine, where Ukrainian companies stepped in and were really able to support the efforts on the ground with the Russians, etc., and how they might remobilize their operations. So the opportunity there is to support those areas that are under fire, and I mean that in the literal sense, or even just are experiencing hard times. And also looking at how they can support operations in the front end, in those areas as well. So there certainly are opportunities. And also, where do you consolidate more into a GBS type environment, from areas where there are troubles, shall we say?
Okay, so let's talk about that bigger picture, because as you've hinted at the beginning, long-term planning is quite a difficult game to be in right now. However, there's been a kind of ongoing long-term shift from talking about cost-cutting as a core function of shared services in GBS and moving along that value creation journey, often with a discussion about end-to-end, which is going to be very important to the conference in October. So maybe just give us the KPMG vision on what end-to-end looks like as a concept in practice and how you think that journey is going for large GBS organizations so far.
Good. So end-to-end cuts across functions. End-to-end is function agnostic. Mm-hmm. It looks at the outcomes. What is the business problem we're trying to solve for? In the past, I think the functions created processes that were functionally led. We've really got to think about the end user and what's important to them and where it drives business value. And when we do that, we then can really work in that functionally agnostic manner, mm-hmm. And drive that value. And what is that value? So we don't measure, how many transactions are done per hour, per person, etc. We measure more the value we've delivered in terms of, payments made, in terms of working capital enhancements and improvements, in terms of, how many projects have improved value in the front office, how faster we've got product to market, etc. And that's quite a game changer. So I think GBS has a massive part to play in that, because they are the engine room of the business, right? And so they are responsible for driving that value across the business.
And are they winning that battle, winning that fight, do you think? Because it's really easy and convenient for GBS to talk functional agnosticism, but if you go into all those functions themselves, they might have a different view.
Do you know what? Sometimes GBS is its own worst enemy, because the functions are still led by people who are functionally siloed, right? GBS leaders are quite a unicorn, because they have to understand HR, IT, finance, etc., etc. So they're quite a unicorn in themselves, and there is the risk that they put the CFO, the CIO, the CDO, HRD under threat. But we shouldn't look at it that way, because I think there's still a place for the functional leaders to drive the strategy and the policies, etc., for the function. But where GBS comes in is actually then driving the execution across those functions. Are they winning that battle? Bit of a mixed bag. I think some of the big ones, and we'll be hearing from some of those organizations this week, are certainly doing that. They're doing that because they've got the C-suite endorsement, they've got the CEO endorsement, that top-down support, and also they've got forward-thinking functional leaders that understand the benefit and understand the way the world's going. However, there's still a lot that haven't quite got that credibility yet from the organization, and I think those are still behind in really being able to drive that enterprise value. They're still seen as just get the transactions done and get them done well, which we should be doing, but we should be taking that a step further now.
So if we look at that tension that you're kind of sketching there between the concept and then the practical implementation, if you're having an end-to-end conversation, the GPO conversation and the importance of that role is not far behind, right? Or is an integral part of that conversation. That's a role which can be incredibly valuable if it's positioned in the right way. What do you think about the progress GPOs are making overall, and what we can do to support them in their efforts to bring end-to-end to life, and therefore support GBS?
GPOs can be seen as Marmite, I think, sometimes in the industry. You either love them or hate them. It's a very English thing. It's a Vegemite, like a Vegemite spread, but it's a more beef one, I guess, in the UK. And you either love it or hate it, right?
Yeah. And
GPOs have unfortunately been tarnished with that brush, I think, to an extent. On paper, the GPO is a brilliant job description, a job role. And that came about, I think in the late 90s, even early noughties, where we were looking at processes and saying the problem isn't in here, in this particular area. The problem is here, that impacts here, which impacts here. And hence looking at it truly end-to-end started making real sense. Hence the GPOs came about. But I think a few things happened. One is the GPOs were chosen on the fact that they had been in a function doing the transactional element of that function for a long time. Didn't make them a good GPO. Made them good at the process or understanding the process. So I think that was one we probably didn't do enough for finding the right capabilities for the role. And I think, two, they weren't given the proper responsibility and accountability in that role. They were sort of seen as middle management. To be really effective as a GPO, you've got to be an incredible stakeholder. You've got to understand business development. You've got to understand the process. You've got to understand how delivery works and the pain points within that. You've got to be able to maneuver between technology, process, and people. And that takes a pretty chunky person. And they've got to sit at the right level of the organization. And you've got to really think about the matrix between service delivery and process change. But then you've also got to think about a true GPO will sit above the functions. Source to pay touches procurement and finance. And really do they roll up together? And who's going to agree to someone, going over both functions? And I think when this role was created, that wasn't really thought through. So I'm having conversations today, believe it or not, I was having 15 years ago, still about the role of the GPO. Like I said, on paper, it absolutely makes sense. But it's going to be a bold organization that really sets the tone and says, actually, regardless of the politics within the functions, regardless of the pain points between IT and HR and finance from a people, process, and person perspective. We're going to give this person the seniority and the authority to go and change the process. And this role is evolving as well, because now we look at AI and Agentic, which I know we'll probably talk about later, but then that person becomes even more important.
Yep.
They become almost the journey owner. And maybe in the future, it's not about being a GPO, it's about being a GJO, a global journey owner. So great role, great on paper. Has it been as effective as what it could be? Probably not, but it's because of our own internal silos that is preventing that from happening.
So we've got to talk about Agentic, and this theme around ownership and position will probably come up in that context as well. Obviously, that is the topic du jour. Everybody is talking about Agentic. KPMG has a very strong value proposition and vision for Agentic business services, right? Just share a little bit of that vision with us.
Absolutely. And Ben, I'm going to start with the positive, because I'm an old cynic, right? I've been around 25 years now doing GBS. So I saw the RPA bubble. I've seen some of the partnerships with external providers not perhaps working. I've seen a lot of GBS leaders come and go over the years. But I've got to say, the cynic has been turned by Agentic and AI. And I really think this is a game changer for us. KPMG have developed the Model Office, which really is looking at end-to-end value streams. So going back to my point around being function agnostic, by the way, something I've said for 8 years, we need to become function agnostic. Mm-hmm. It's so nice to see we are now moving there, because it has to be the future. And what we've done is we've created the Model Office, which looks at end-to-end processes, and we've created agents along those, but we've also redesigned the processes and the organization that sits around it. So how are humans' roles going to change? How are outcomes going to change? What is the additional intelligence we can source from this new process? Because we're totally doing new roles and new ways of working. Where do humans sit in the loop, on top of the loop? How do we ensure that the control environment is such that we can trust these agents, these new AI agents that are now part of our workforce? So our view is that Agentic AI is the future. We've got to move past point solutions. We've got to be completely bought into it. And, we've got to completely redesign our capabilities, our organization models, which will then, in turn, have an impact on how we deliver services entirely, mm-hmm. and who we work with in the future as well. And potentially even locations may become less important. So that's going to take some time. We're just starting this journey, really. But it's exciting, because for the first time, I'm not just seeing, in the old days, a bot pop in and do a little macro, mm-hmm. Or I used to call them Excel on steroids, to do a part of a process. I'm now really seeing the human doing a completely new role that adds a very different type of value, but is very, very intelligent, mm-hmm. and gives us intelligence that we've never had before.
So on that same topic, right, because the problem with Agentic is there are lots of stakeholders within large organizations vying for ownership and control of Agentic. What makes GBS a good candidate for that? Or, alternatively, is it a bit narrow-minded and maybe even self-serving to think in those terms around ownership? Like, is the absolute overall ownership of Agentic as a transformative initiative really important, or is it more about the value that we can derive with or without that control?
I mean, the logical answer is to say ownership doesn't matter. It's about the value we can derive from it. But the Candice is going to say, of course it should sit in GBS. Why wouldn't you put it in GBS? Especially as GBS organizations are now really at the enterprise level, right? They are not just, buried into the back office, mm-hmm. transactional elements. They really are rising and becoming, cross-functional, multifunctional, multi-geography organizations. And I've said before, when you create a GBS organization, you create great capability in change management, project management, transition management, deep understanding of the organization. I mean, I remember my first role in GBS was not long out of university. And, within a few years, I really understood everything that happened from the front office and that process and how the data flowed all the way through the organization, right up until, the bill was paid or vice versa, or the employee was paid, etc., which was quite a revelation. And it was almost like having X-ray vision of the organization. So absolutely, I think GBS has the right capability, the access to the right processes, the understanding of how processes work, the understanding of how the organization works, to really be able to drive AI and Agentic through the business. And you also want it in a place where it can be managed in a consolidated manner. And you want some control over it. You don't want people going off and creating their own bots and their own agents, etc., through the organization. You do want to have an element of control because it's still quite a new and emerging technology. And we still hear about agents hallucinating, etc. So that element of control, I think, above the creativity and the ability for GBS to drive it is still important.
And we're probably not going to get into this, but somehow a different risk framework as well, right? Because I've heard a lot of arguments that the error rate of the machine is an awful lot lower, but the expectation of errors made by the agent must be zero in some cases in order to be rolled out effectively.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
That's a bigger barrier to overcome.
If a human makes a mistake, you know how to deal with that.
Mm-hmm.
When a machine makes a mistake, who's accountable?
Yeah. On the topic if we zoom out a little bit, I mean, we can keep talking about Agentic, but we often talk now about the customer of GBS, right? So what do you think that customer, either internal or I guess external to the business, up to you, wants or needs from a really good GBS organization moving forward?
So I still think there's an element of they want a seamless life, right? So if they use expenses, if they are a buyer, if they are a seller, in the organization, the stuff that needs to happen to enable them to sell, to enable them to buy, to enable them to be an employee, that stuff must just happen. It must be pain-free. Execution must be seamless. That's one. So absolute customer experience. We've got so used to customer experience being, okay.
Mm-hmm.
It works 50% of the time. We've got used to it. We should absolutely be striving for excellence. So I think it's just the day-to-day tasks of running the business should just happen seamlessly. Yep. And second of all, I think it's then what they want is, what value now can you give me over and above, doing that stuff that should just happen. So for example, if I've got a business problem, there's in a regulated business and there's a regulatory change, I want to be able to call on a team that can help me drive that change in my business so that I don't have to worry about it. I don't have to try and source my own project managers, my own experts, etc. I want to be able to call on almost like an internal consultancy that can do that for me. That's the value add. I think that is over and above just delivering services. Mm-hmm. That's where it can really help me as a business leader in the commercially focused, for example, focus on those type of things without having to worry about some of the other elements.
Yeah. So that's quite a bold mandate, right, to move towards being really accepted as, I guess we're talking about a business partner in the truest sense, where there's acceptance of the value that they bring to the organization. As we move towards the close, what about the characteristics of the person who's in that role, the GBS leader? Because there's been quite a lot of stuff said and written about how, for example, shared service center managers or leaders have, if they think in terms of the role that they've been doing for the last 5 or 10 years, they'll be gone in 5 more years or maybe even less. So if we take that up to top level, what does the future GBS leader need to do? What characteristics do they need to have to be able to deliver this really bold mandate that you've mapped out for us?
Leaders differ organization to organization. So I don't think there's a broad brush type of personality, because sometimes somebody slightly more subdued or introvert works in a certain industry and where someone more extrovert works in another. Mm-hmm. But I think there are some key fundamental skills they need. One is they've got to have good business development skills. They've got to understand and know how to sell.
Yep.
I mean, if you think about a GBS leader in the captive sense, and you think about a GBS leader in the BPO sense, BPO leaders have got really good BD skills, right? And they need to. So I think business development skills are important. Understanding your organization, having great stakeholder management and engagement. A GBS leader should spend 60% at least of their time out there talking to their stakeholders, talking to the business leaders, understanding what is top of their minds and how GBS is going to resolve that for them. Understanding what concerns that they have about the GBS organization, and then showing how they're improving based on those concerns and what changes they're making to the organization. So I think business development, stakeholder engagement, and then having empathy to their people. Because what you also want in GBS is you want a really solid, steady, good workforce and capabilities that sit behind it. You want to manage attrition well, healthy attrition, and you want people that are committed and understand service delivery but still feel really much part of the business. So I think those are the top three: business development, strong stakeholder engagement, and good empathy for the people.
So to tie it all together in one neat bow, which may not survive contact with the real world, is the future bright for GBS overall?
100%. I don't think it's ever been brighter. You know, whether it's GBS and all the service delivery models that sit underneath it, the technologies that come with it, it's incredibly bright. It's growing and it's evolving. And that's one thing I've learned in 25 years of this. It just keeps reinventing itself. It keeps evolving. It keeps growing. And it's, dare I say, it's sexier now than it's ever been. Because we're doing really cool stuff. We've really moved past that invoice processing mindset that was there 20 years ago. And we're now seeing GBS leaders sitting at the top table, driving enterprise value in ways we've never seen before.
That's a very optimistic note. And then before we close, obviously, you and I have put a lot of effort into building a strong partnership for Shared Services Autumn and for KPMG in the last couple of months. Tell us why you're excited about that partnership and why it's important for the GBS practice of KPMG.
I am delighted with the investment that KPMG are making in GBS. I wouldn't be here if we weren't. And that investment transcends geographies. It's a multidisciplinary approach we're putting into it. Just the investment we've made in Agentic is phenomenal, and the investment now we're making in capabilities and in people. But all of that investment's no good if we don't have the brand presence and we don't have the partnerships like yours. And so it's so important to us because it's the biggest network of shared service leaders, GBS leaders, outsourcing leaders globally. So for us, this partnership is fantastic because it's a way that we can access those leaders. We can work with thought leaders. We can be part of your thought leadership program. We can be part of the narrative for GBS and the future of shared services. So incredibly important, very excited. We love the team, as you know. We love working with the team. And this is just one of many events to come.
Well, you heard it here first. Candice, thank you very much for your time today. Thank you to everybody watching, and we look forward to seeing you in Amsterdam. Bye-bye.